Thank you. Hello, I'm Jonathan. Thank you all very much for coming. So I'll just start out and tell you, Spider was born in Fairfield, Alabama, and all of these photographs, he started taking pictures for the Birmingham News about a year before all of this happened. So I'm just going to start chronologically and go through. Now, Spider is very, I'm going to step back for this. Spider is infamous for writing on his actual prints, and which irritates me to no end as a photographer, but I've grown to really appreciate it, especially for, you can see that, he would tell stories about his images and give a little bit of insight into what he was doing. So Spider, with Selma, Spider was down there to cover the march. They didn't know what was actually going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and get to the march. This is Spider there. Okay, so in Selma, they were marching for trying to get the Voting Rights Act passed. Now this is Andrew Young, this right here is Amelia Boynton over on the far right. Can y'all see? Okay, so this is Amelia Boynton, she was 102 now. She's still alive to this day. She lives down in Tuskegee, but she invited Andrew and Martin Luther King and Hosea Williams and Abernathy all down to try and get attention to getting the Voting Rights Act passed. This is Andrew Young leading a prayer prior to marching here in Selma. Not here in Selma. All right, so this is the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Spider was one of maybe 5 photographers that were there that day. Have y'all heard of Charles Moore? He is also a famous civil rights photographer who was there. But right here on the right, this is John Lewis, and then that is Hosea Williams. All right, so this picture here, this is called the 2-minute warning, which I don't think is the truth because it happened very quickly. But the troopers were trying to prevent them from marching towards Montgomery. And so right here, Hosea is actually holding his nose out of fear that they were about to gas them, which they promptly then did do. And this is John Lewis. You can actually see the Billy Club about to hit John Lewis, which he still has an indentation in his head from being beat. And then this is Amelia Boynton is in there as well. Now this is Amelia Boynton. So Amelia Boynton registered to vote in Alabama in 1934 as a black woman. And what a lot of people don't realize, John Lewis was 25 years old when all this was happening. He was young. She, I think, is 49 when these photos were taken. It's the 50th anniversary next year, and it's March 7th, 1965, so she would be 102 minus 50, which is 52. So she had kids, she had 3 children. She wasn't just a young activist who was doing this. She was someone who was much more involved in the community, and the story I've heard is they actually took her in a hearse to the, sorry, I'm quite nervous. But they thought she was dead. They didn't think she was going to live. I mean, the troopers are literally sitting there standing over here. So Spider, a little bit about Spider is he was barely over 5 feet tall. He was able to move in and out. He was able to get in positions and places that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be able to. And he actually was beaten at this march. Tracy, his daughter, told me a story earlier today about how troopers were actually standing over him, and one of them was about to hit him with a baton and said, "Oh, we thought you were a black person," but not using that word. The slanderous word. So this here is an image that a Spider never printed, to my knowledge. And you can see this is all the gas, the tear gas that they had used to try and get the crowd. Now this photo here is what they called the White Citizens Council here in Montgomery. And they were protesting. Now Spider had convinced, or not convinced, but a lot of times with the photographers, they would try and take their cameras, during the Freedom Ride, the Freedom Riders, John Lewis told us a story about how they would literally beat up the photographers, they would take their cameras, they would crash them, break them. But one of the interesting things is they would also use spray paint and literally try and spray paint over the lenses to prevent them from being able to take photographs. So Tracy told me a story about how her dad used to carry just a ton of lens filters in his pocket. So if they do that, he would just take the lens filter off, replace it, and So it was his way of getting around that. But this photo here has always struck me. I mean, just the guy laughing down here, the expression on his face with the bird. I mean, it was almost like a spectacle when they came out to protest the final march. There were three marches from Selma. The very first one, which is where all of Bloody Sunday happened, that was March 7th, 1965. There was another march a couple of days later that they didn't go all the way to Montgomery. It was more of a, we're still going to go across this bridge. So how I know Spider, what I do with Spider is Tracy asked me to help handle his archives. And Tracy is not a very technologically adept person, so I'm a photographer by trade, and I'm someone who's interested in this stuff. This is over a decade ago. And so she had me start scanning stuff. These are the images that still get me. There's probably a good 100 images at this protest of, I'll show you a few more. Now, this is the stuff that gets me riled up. Just one of the neat things is you can see the women still have their hair rollers in. I mean, they were just there for the day to go protest all this. Now this is actually Fred Shuttlesworth there, who, Shuttlesworth wasn't as involved in everything in Selma. He's much more involved up in Birmingham, but and this is Andrew Young here, and then obviously Martin Luther King. This is taken in Selma, I believe after the second march. But Fred Shuttlesworth and Martin Luther King, Shuttlesworth was much more of an antagonist. Like, he wanted to actually take it to the streets. He wanted to fight back more than Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was peaceful, and let me see, this is them actually speaking in Selma. So these are photos that until recently, this has never been printed, this had never been shown. We had a show recently of Spider's work and my photography, and doing that show, we put together much of Spider's work that has never been seen, and this is one of those images. You can see Fred Shuttlesworth here looking at Martin speaking. I thought for a while that might be Spider in the background, but it's not. It looks just like him. But this photo here is probably, it's one of the most iconic photos Spider took, and Tracy and I, we don't know who it is, which I think is interesting. I love the idea of this jacket being out there somewhere to this day. Not long ago, Tracy and I went to visit John Lewis at his office in Atlanta, and John gave us, he thinks he may know who it is, so we're trying to currently get in touch with him. So the third march, where they actually march from Selma to Montgomery, there's a few photos along the way that Spider took. Spider, he was on assignment for the Birmingham News when all of this was happening. And they told him, I have a picture towards the end of the actual front page, but they told him the assignment was over, that he should come home. They were very upset about all these photos getting out. What people don't realize about Selma and Bloody Sunday is, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington was just this past year. This is actually 2 years after the fact. a lot of these photographs in the Birmingham News didn't get printed. They weren't shown to the public. They were actually shown to the police and shown to show how the movement and how to try and infiltrate the movement. There was a really great art show in Birmingham at the Public Library about a year or two ago. And I think it's going to be up again, or it's touring. It might be at the Civil Rights Institute. But it's all Birmingham News photographers, and it's made completely of photographs that were never run. Very little, the photographers are actually in the field seeing this, but the news was in cahoots with the police. Very little was actually being shown to the public. So out in the suburbs, they didn't know exactly what was happening downtown, which I think is very interesting telling of the time. This is the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and this is the 3rd March. You can see here it says Hawaii knows integration works? Yeah, Hawaii knows integration works. Hawaii is one of the first that was integrated. I think it's interesting, at the time of this, in '65, Barack Obama would have been 4, which I think is just to show you how much time has passed since this happened. But this photo here just kind of, it shows you the scale, and also you can just see how many more photographers and all that. Spider was one of the few photographers that was there on Bloody Sunday, and he chose, the Birmingham News took him off, told him the assignment was done, but he chose to stay. He stayed there for 5 weeks and actually documented the preparation, everything that was about to happen with the final march. This was 2 weeks after Bloody Sunday. I've always loved this photo of just Martin Luther King changing his shoes. And they had police protection. And this, you can see Andrew Young here. Andrew Young was more of the spokesman for the movement. He's who they would put in front of the cameras often. He was very well educated. He actually went on to be the mayor of Atlanta, the congressman from Georgia, and then the UN ambassador under Jimmy Carter. And he's very active today. This photo here is, not all of Spider's images were of the bad things that happened. Many of them were just beautiful moments along the way. I'm in the process right now of scanning all of his negatives from that period, which there's about 50 rolls, so that's about 1,500 images. And a lot of it is stuff like this, the coming together, which I very much enjoy. Now this picture here, it's somewhere along the march from Selma to Montgomery, but it's not one of Spider's more iconic pictures. For some reason, it just sticks out to me. He mostly photographed people. I mean, this was, action that was happening, but this just, can you imagine that's what, having that up today? And this is the march proceeding. So here is Martin and Coretta. This is actually here in Montgomery. This is, I believe, just right out here. It's on Dexter Avenue. This is the final march into Montgomery. And there is Martin Luther King again. So Spider, he did all this when he was 25. He was still a very young photographer. This is one of the first assignments he had for the Birmingham News. He stayed very involved in the movement. He actually even went on to be the press photographer, the official photographer for George Wallace, who was the exact opposite of, he was pro-segregation. He was very anti the voting rights and all that stuff. And Spider had told George Wallace when he asked him, he said, you can pay me, I'll do the work, but I'm not going to vote for you. Which I think was very interesting. He made the entire march. I'm not sure of his name. Tracy could remember, but he made the entire march on his crutches, it's a pretty good little distance from Selma to Montgomery. This is just more of march. This is one of my favorite photographs. So, with Spider, his size, he was able to get places that a lot of other people couldn't. He was able to, there's a picture I can go back to, but it shows him up in a tree. He was would wind his way in and out. And when we went to go see John Lewis, he was telling us who each, like he recognized a lot of these people, including the guy from Jet magazine. And either way, like this is, one of my favorite things about this is just being able to see the crowd and see what someone, as I'm sitting here looking out at y'all, what someone would be seeing at a moment like this. This is, 2 years after the March on Washington. This is Fred Shuttlesworth. This is in 1964 in Birmingham. This is one of his earlier assignments for the Birmingham News. For the show that we had in Montevallo, we were trying to find more pictures of Shuttlesworth. I have photographed many of these people, which I'm about to show you all some of these pictures. Through doing work for Spider and doing work for Alabama Public Television, and I've done work for Andrew Young's foundation, I've had the opportunity to meet and photograph many of the same people that Spider documented 50 years before, such as Andrew Young. This is a photo that Spider, I don't think he ever printed this. But okay, so this is getting into what I've done. So the show that we put together at Montevallo, I printed I printed many images of spiders, and it's a juxtaposition of then and now. So, for instance, this is John Lewis, which you can tell here. I'm not you can kind of tell. I don't know about on this actual screen, but you can still see the dent in his head whenever you meet him or talk to him in person. I mean, if the light's right, you can see where he was beaten. But this is him looking at a picture of spiders of 2 Minute Warning. And let's see, this is a photograph I took of John Lewis. It's a double exposure. I tend to work, Spider was a documentary photographer at that point. He went on to photograph, fashion. He worked for many, many other magazines. And was Gooch still here? No, there was a contemporary of his was here earlier. But Spider went on to have a very different career from what started it. And our type of photography is much more similar later in his life. But here, this is, John Lewis. I like to do double exposures quite often. This is John Lewis's hands. The day that Tracy was with me, the day that we took these photographs, he actually just came out with a graphic novel that is the story of the civil rights, from the very beginning all the way through. It's going to be a 3-part thing, but he was speaking in Atlanta at the Decatur Book Conference. This was also the very same day that Obama gave his speech on Syria, saying whether, it was looking like there might be an impending war in Syria, which that day he was running late. So Tracy and I were just sitting there in his office waiting for him, wondering whether we're about to go to war with Syria while, he's still a congressman. He's I'm not sure his actual position in Congress. He's pretty high up. I think it might be the deputy whip. I'm not sure. But, seeing this important news happening on the TV screen while you're sitting in a congressman's office I called my mom. I was like, Mom, this is crazy. And he sat there and talked to us for about a couple of hours and just told stories of Spider, told stories of the movement. This photo here, this is when he was arrested in Mississippi, and this was actually at the very end of the shoot, and we had just been walking down his hall, and I saw that, and I was like, can I please take your picture with your mugshot? He was arrested, I think, about a month ago for the 39th time, so I would love to see all of his mugshots in a row, because, that's one of my favorite photographs I've taken in a long time. This is Amelia Boynton, she's 102, she'll be 103 in August. And I've been on a few different documentary shoots with her, and she remembers everything. She's, some people when they get to that age don't remember everything, and she's just always smiling. She's one of the sweetest, kindest people I've been fortunate to meet. A few years ago, Andrew Young was given a Lifetime Emmy Award, and one of the guests of honor was Amelia up in New York City, and Harry Belafonte was there, and Hank Aaron, but I got to sit at a table with her and have dinner, which is just something very special to me. But this is a double exposure. You can't tell here with the white, but you can. There's actually the bridge is Edmund Pettus Bridge is double exposed up there, and this is her at the bridge keeper's house. Andrew Young. This is only the second time he had been back to Memphis to the Lorraine Hotel, which is where Martin Luther King was assassinated. You can't tell quite that well in this projection, but that's actually the spot where Martin Luther King was. You can kind of see the wreath that they still have up there. And this was while we were waiting for lunch. We were up there working on a documentary for his foundation. And this is him actually at the, that right up here is where Martin Luther King was assassinated. This is at the church where Martin Luther King gave his last speech. Andrew was his best friend, essentially. He, before Martin was assassinated, they had a pillow fight in the hotel room, and they were up there for the Memphis, the garbage strikes. But this is Andrew, which he didn't like this picture very much when he came to the show because it shows his bald spot in the back. This is sitting at the church where Martin gave his last speech. Fred Shuttlesworth I had a chance to work on a documentary for APT that never came to fruition, but we got to spend the entire day with him and this is him in front of the house where he grew up. I think, if I remember correctly, I think he was actually born at that house. And this is him at that house as well. Now this is Fred in Bethel Baptist, which is where he was a pastor. Right beyond here, on the other side of that, is where the KKK bombed his house on Christmas Day. This was also the first time he'd been back there in about 40 years. Fred Shuttlesworth, he changed a lot in Birmingham. I mean, he obviously changed the world. This is him sitting at 16th Street Baptist, and this was unintentional. I didn't find this out till much later, but it's actually where the bomb went off. When we were doing the documentary shoot, I was just the still photographer back in the background, and then as soon as they would kind of hit a stopping point, I would, get to go in and talk to him while everybody was packing up the gear and all that. So I would sit with him for about 5 minutes, and he'd been talking most of the day. This was one of the last shots, one of the last places we went, and then we went to the Civil Rights Institute after that. But when I would talk to him, he was, he was tired at that point, and so he would just sit there and look at me, and we would just have small talk. All right, here, I'm going to go back to the very beginning. Actually, I'll hold for that. So, yeah, the show right now, we're going to be showing this work in person. There's a great deal of it. I haven't been upstairs yet, but Spider Martin has a good bit of work here. Has anybody seen the show or how it's presented upstairs yet? But yeah, so it will be up there. Now, the show that we put together at Montevallo, Scott Stevens, who is the interim dean at the art department, and that's where I graduated from, with it coming, with the 50th anniversary of everything in Selma and all the anniversaries of stuff, everything in Birmingham, they wanted to put together an art show that encompassed, showed everything from the civil rights. So he had the idea of putting, my work with Spider's work, and we had this show back in November. It's actually going to be showing in Selma next month for the bridge crossing, for the 49th anniversary. It'll be at the Selma Interpretive Center, the National Park Service new Interpretive Center. And I think after that, we're trying to get the show to travel around more. But in the process, we're also looking through and scanning a bunch of negatives that have never been seen. And we're going to try and put together, you know, a different way to see, put it up on the internet, have it where people can see it. But I think that concludes my talk for now. I'm going to be ready for Q&A.
We can take questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Marcus or I will see that you get a microphone and speak directly into it so it can be recorded on the video. We have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know the
Just speak into it.
do we know the identity of the state troopers at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge? I know we know the trooper, was it McLeod or Clown?
I'm not.
Who gave the order to advance.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know the identity of those other troopers? And my second question is, did the Alabama State Troopers have their own photographer who took photos of this march? And if so, have those photos ever been shown to the public?
Yeah. Well, let me go back actually to the first image. As far as, nope, that's not what I wanted to hit. I'm not a Windows person. I'll be answering here. Yeah, I just want to get it back to the very beginning. But so, as far as I know, a lot of the images, when I'm scanning it, you know, you can't see all the detail here. And that's something that's very interesting, is being able to see the faces and get in close. So, for instance, this one, there's another shot very similar that I don't think I have in this presentation, but it's just of the troopers. And there's one of the troopers just has this, he looks like a maniac, like he has this look of evil on his face. And so I imagine, I don't know which ones people know who they are or not, but at this point you could be able to tell. And your second question, as far as them having their own photographer, I don't know if you can make it out here, that's actually someone taking a picture right there. And I've always wondered the exact opposite shot, coming back to see how Spider looked or to see it from the other angle. There weren't that many photographers there. And like I said during the earlier, like they would literally, John Lewis told us a story of how when the Freedom Riders would come into a town, like that's one of the first things they would do is the people who were, you know, protesting against it, they would see the photographer and try and grab their cameras. They would take them, throw them on the ground, spray paint them. So I've always been curious how many other pictures exist at this, and especially that one, you know, that guy there. So, yeah, there's several pictures of Spider. This was taken later. This is when he was working for Wallace, I believe. But such as this, I don't know who took this picture. This is just a picture that he had. Spider, when he took these photographs, he has prints that he made about a year after the event, and then the news said they lost the negatives. So until 1995, actually, when someone claimed to have found them at the Birmingham News and gave them back to Spider, a lot of these images had been gone for 30 plus years. So what we're looking at right now, what I've been scanning, is things that they thought were lost until about 20 years ago. So in this picture here, maybe Tracy would know. My guess is it's Charles Moore who took this, who's also a very famous photographer. He shot for the Birmingham News, and he is deceased at this point, but I saw that there's a book coming out soon, which is Charles Moore and Richard Avedon, who is one of my favorite photographers ever, but he came down and documented in Mississippi and through Alabama, and it's work that's never really been seen, most of it. So that's a book that I'm sure will be coming out soon. Yes? Okay.
Technical question. I noticed that a lot of the photos that you're showing show what looks like the full border of, the frame of the picture itself, photograph itself. And I take it from looking at this photo of Spider and the previous one that he was using 35 millimeter.
Mhm.
Looks like a Leica here, maybe in the Malta in the previous one. But I do see a couple of the photos that look like they may have been cropped. Have you done
Yeah.
much cropping?
I personally, and that's a aesthetic of my own, I do not crop. All of my images, I shoot medium format. Spider, all of this was shot on 35 millimeter. He later went on to shoot 4x5 and 2 1/4 as well, which 2 1/4 is, it gives you a negative that's about that big. So there's that much more detail in the image. And Spider was a creative cropper. This for instance is a heavily cropped image. This is about half of the negative. So he's cutting out both the sky and the bottom. And that is something that I chose to do for the show. I like to see the full frame. There's a couple of images that with the full frame, for instance here, this is something he would have cropped out. You can't tell, but this is a 16 millimeter, it's a motion camera. And this image here, you can't tell either on this screen, but there's actually a big fingerprint right here, which I am pretty sure is Spider's, because I don't know who else's it would be. But yeah, I chose to print all of this at full frame, partly to differentiate that this is not, Spider did not print this, to show that it was a conscious choice on my end to do it that way.
Beautifully done.
Thank you. And the prints look, they'll be up in Selma. The show is hopefully going to be traveling next year, but it's definitely going to be in Selma for the 49th anniversary next month, or I guess just 20 days from now or so. But yes, any other questions? Yes.
Spider used to tell an interesting story about right after the march when he went out to take pictures when Violet Liuzzo was killed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have those photos by any chance in that exhibit?
It's not in that exhibit. We chose to focus mainly on Selma for that exhibit, but yes, those. I've actually just scanned some of those negatives the other day, but I didn't have them for this presentation. I chose to focus on Selma. But yes, those photos are out there. Just out of curiosity, how many of y'all knew, or how many of y'all met Spider? 1, 2, 3. I never met Spider, which is interesting to me. He has influenced my life in a huge way. If you met him, he was a character. He was a very interesting person, to say the least. And I've heard stories all over the board, from salacious stories to, stories from here. He had a huge impression on the Birmingham photography scene and art scene in general. And one of my favorite things is people just will come up to me and share these stories. I assisted photographers for a long time in Birmingham. That's kind of how you start, is you assist people and learn from them. Actually, Mark was in here earlier. He's someone I used to assist. And so all of them would have Spider stories. I'd be curious to hear any other ones you may have.
I just wanted to mention in regard to that question that I asked that he had taken the photo by having a trench coat on, and they did not realize he was taking the photo, and then went back to public safety here in downtown, developed the picture in their development room in the basement, and was able to get half of the picture run off, I think, like a mimeograph or whatever, to send it out, and that's how his picture was the only one that was taken, from what Spider said of that particular incident. Yeah,
and the picture she's talking about, it's from the murder of I can never say her name. Viola. She was from Michigan, and she came down here. She was a mother and came down here and was running people to the polls to register to vote, and the KKK murdered her. And yes, I've never heard that story, actually. That's very interesting. Like I said earlier, Spider is someone who would figure out how to get and how to do. But yes.
Spider and Howell Raines both came
I'm not sure about Howell Raines. Spider came from Fairfield. And, he was from Fairfield. I'm not sure about Howell.
I believe Howell was born around Fairfield, Bessemer, out in that area.
Mhm.
Did they work for the Birmingham News at the same time?
I'm not sure. I know Spider worked there from 1964 to, I think, Tracy said he worked there for 2.5 years, so that would be the about, I guess, 1966. Yeah. So, yeah, probably. Yeah, I'd be curious. I'm not familiar with his work or Howell Raines.
Howell was the Howell was the editor of
Okay.
the New York Times until a few years ago he resigned.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. Interesting.
Just one quick question. Why was he called Spider?
Actually, because of the Birmingham News, his real name is James Martin. They called him Spider. He played football, and a reporter commented that he moved around the field like a spider, like he darted around, and so that name just took over. And his daughter Tracy is so Spider died in 2003. I don't know if any of y'all have been to Day of the Dead in Birmingham or Dia de los Muertos, but Spider spent a lot of his life in Mexico and was very into Hispanic traditions, and that's one of the things they celebrated. So after his death, Tracy created a memorial that turned into Day of the Dead in Birmingham, which if y'all have ever been, it's really interesting. It's a great event. But yes, that's how I got his name, Spider. Are there other questions?
Do we have another question? Here's one.
Mm-hmm.
Spider said that he had a lot of his collection in a trailer that was parked inside a warehouse in Birmingham, and that it was located there for security reasons because people wanted to destroy his photos. Do you know anything about that?
I've never heard that story, but that's interesting. Like I said, the negatives were lost until 1995. So you'll see, like I was showing earlier, where he writes on stuff, he'll put 1995. But that sounds very much like something Spider might have done. I'd be curious what Tracy will say about that. Yes. Nope.
Do we have another question? If not, Johnathan will be here for a few minutes after the program. If you have a question for him, and stay tuned for our next program at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.